What's up, guys? Mr. Terry, your high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher X video. All right, this video is absolutely killing it in views. It's from the Paint Explainer, and it's called Every Major Human Mistake That Changed History Forever. I saw that this is hitting the React scene. Even got our friend Drew Durnall. I saw that he covered it. I haven't watched it yet, though, so I am excited to hear these arguments. Now, looking at the thumbnail, seeing a bunch of different events that are famous in history, we should be able to have a lot to talk about here. And before we get to it, make sure you are supporting the original down below. If you like the original, make sure you're going and checking out their original stuff. Sub to the Paint Explainer. Like this video if you like this kind of content. By the way, did you guys know I'm on social media? You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Instagram, TikTok. Go down in the description. You can see everything. All right, let's get started. All right, I was actually going to wear just like the normal Carhartt stuff that I watched. And then I saw the thumbnail and it said, you know, Khan's diplomats with Genghis Khan. And, you know, when that comes up, you got to pull out the crash course, you know, shirt. If you know, you know. All right, let's see what we got. But yeah, Khan's diplomats. One thing we know is don't mess with Mongol envoys, messengers, diplomats, traders. Don't mess with the Mongols or the Mongols are going to mess with you.
Insulting Genghis Khan's diplomats. One of the most destructive military campaigns in human history started for a basically useless reason. In the early 1200s, Genghis Khan, leader of the Mongols, was technically at peace with the Khwarezmian Empire, and the two had even fought against shared enemies. But everything changed when a Mongol trade caravan entered Khwarezmian territory and was attacked by a local governor who stole the goods and killed the merchants.
Yeah, they thought they were like spies and stuff like that. Khwarezmian Empire, you probably never heard of them. And the reason you've not heard of them, I think you're going to find out by the end of this clip, but they were a mighty, mighty empire. Islamic empire, basically like a new Persia. And you saw the map before. They were huge. And that kind of strength and their profitability and their strength, you know, whatever, went to their heads. They underestimate the Mongols.
Instead of going to war right away, Genghis Khan sent ambassadors to the Shah of Khwarezm to ask for justice and for the governor to be punished. But the Shah made a terrible decision. He had one of the Mongol envoys killed and sent his severed head back with the others.
Now, maybe this is a thing in retrospect. You already messed up, okay, by attacking Mongol traders. And usually that's the end of it. Like Mongol negotiations, anything, you are the aggressor, they are going to come back on you tenfold, right? It's amazing that even with that, they brought another peaceful envoy and killed them. And yeah, cut off the heads because that's what you do back in those days. You got two chances with the Mongols. You're lucky to get one. Remember how I said you may have never heard of the Khwarezmian Empire? Check this out. I haven't even seen this, but I'm assuming you're going to see what I'm talking about.
In Mongol culture, harming a messenger was a serious offense. It was seen not just as an insult, but as a clear act of war.
A lot of civilizations are like that.
Responded with a massive invasion. His army destroyed entire cities and completely wiped out the Khwarezmian Empire. Even the lowest estimates suggest that millions died, but the attack didn't stop there. The Mongols continued west, bringing destruction to Persia, parts of the Middle East, and even into Europe. No one can say for sure what would have happened if the Shah had simply apologized and punished the governor. But
well, here's what I would say. They weren't necessarily the next target on the list. China was Mongols were knee deep in China right now and trying to work with that. But with this, you know, hostility, it kind of diverted them away from China just a little bit. And you had that. Now, one group that should be really pissed at this, other than the Mongols, is the empire west of the Khwarezmian Empire, the Abbasids, right? The Islamic Caliphate over there. They're in their golden age where they're kind of, you know, coming out of the height of it, but they should be pissed because the Khwarezmian Empire is their little buffer zone, and they're going to get it next after this.
What we do know is that at the time, the Mongols were busy fighting a war in China, so by killing the ambassador, the Shah may have accidentally triggered one of the most destructive military campaigns in human history. German U-110.
Okay. All right, yep, good one. And that is not the only story that's going to be like that. You know, the Mongols it's interesting, do a lot of peace offerings first, right? And they kind of scale their brutality, if you want to call it that. There's still some of those brutal people that have ever existed on this earth, but they do scale it a bit depending on how much you resist. Like they're coming in, but they might make you a deal, peaceful deal. Maybe it's a trade deal, you know, whatever it is, pay tribute, that kind of thing. Now, when you do something stupid like this, then you get annihilated, like Khwarezmians did. They didn't leave. They weren't leaving any, like, man, women, children. Empire's going to scatter. Those that stick around are going to be it's going to be part of a bloodbath. All right. German U-boat. Okay. 110. Here we go.
On its first mission in March 1941, the German submarine damaged two Allied ships, but had to stop early after an accident with its own gun injured some of the crew. But its second mission in April and May 1941 would change the course of the war. After sinking several Allied ships in the North Atlantic, U-110 was chased by British warships. On May 9, 1941, after being hit by depth charges, the German submarine was forced to surface. This was part of a British effort later called Operation Primrose. The Allied ships surrounded the damaged U-boat. At first, the British thought the Germans would fight back and opened fire, but stopped when they realized the crew was surrendering.
Now, context here is important because one thing the Germans were very innovative in, you saw this actually in World War I, was submarine technology, right? I like to say that, you know, at surface level and up, the British are kind of unmatched. Okay, there's going to be some incredible German ships and all that. But anyway, they're kind of unmatched, okay, above water. Underwater is smartly, I believe, where the Germans were like, okay, this is where we might be able to do something. And if you can, again, get these wolf packs and stuff to surface, then all of a sudden you bring them up to that surface level. And we just talked about that's where the British are. So anyway, that's a little bit of context about like, okay, why is submarines going on? What's this and that? Here we go.
The German commander, Fritz Julius Lemp, saw that the submarine wasn't sinking like it was supposed to. He tried to swim back and destroy the Enigma machine, a type of encryption device used by Nazi Germany to send secret military messages. But he disappeared. No one knows for sure how he died. Meanwhile, British sailors boarded the abandoned U-110 and recovered the Enigma machine along with valuable codebooks. These gave British codebreakers at Bletchley Park a major advantage in reading secret German naval messages, especially a backup cipher known as Reservehandverfahren. To keep their success
Come on, we got to have fun with the names here, okay? I don't care if you actually know German.
Especially a backup cipher known as Reservehandverfahren.
Reservehandverfahren? No, that was like Swedish. I'm sorry, I apologize.
To keep their success a secret, the British let U-110 sink and pretended it had gone down with everything still inside. Constantine V.
It took a long time for them to eventually break that code. Heard of Alan Turing? Fantastic movie called Imitation Game with Benedict Cumberbatch, where they go over that. He ends up being a tragic story, but yeah, it took a long time. And to decode that thing was an incredible effort. They had the top cryptologists or code breakers, basically they could get, from Britain to work there. And then breaking that code was a major, major thing because, World War II was as much of a war on the ground. It was also an information war. Same thing was going on in the Pacific with like the magic code the Japanese were using. And it's you get intercept messages. Like that's not hard. I mean, they're just broadcasting on the airwaves and stuff, but everyone speaks in different codes. The United States, their awesome one that they used, which is going to be unbreakable, was Navajo. Have you heard of that? The code talkers. Very cool. Basically, Navajo Americans, speak a language which is very select, right? Only by the Navajo Nation are able to use that, and then that was basically unbreakable. But this stuff was basically it's just algorithms, right? If you could break the code, then you can break it, and they did. And the British ended up getting some very important intel on German movements and things like that, and cracking that sort of like communication stalemate. Turn the tide. All right. Man, these stories are so big and so fun to talk about, but we might be here forever. It's all right. Get yourself a drink. I got mine. Let's relax, talk some history. Let's have some fun. Here we go. What's next?
Known as Reservehandverfahren. To keep their success a secret, the British let U-110 sink and pretended it had gone down with everything still inside. Constantine V's trust.
Okay.
In 774, Byzantine Emperor Constantine V launched a military campaign against Bulgaria, but it failed. However, he gained a major advantage after.
You don't hear much about this story.
Spies inside the Bulgarian court in Pliska were secretly giving him valuable information. The Bulgarian ruler Teutoburg began to notice that Constantine always seemed to know his plans. He eventually realized that his government had been infiltrated by Byzantine spies. Teutoburg came up with a clever plan, or perhaps Constantine was just too trusting.
I don't really know about this story.
He sent a message to Constantine, pretending he wanted to defect to Constantinople and join him. He asked for the names of the emperor's agents in Pliska, saying he needed them to make sure they stayed safe while he escaped. Constantine believed him and gave him the list. The thing is, Teutoburg had no intention of defecting. Once he got the names, he executed all the Byzantine spies in his court, completely destroying Constantine's spy network in one move. The fall of the Berlin Wall.
I mean, I don't know what effects, because we're talking about like change history forever. I find that to be more just like a very interesting story. And of course, it's going to have effects and stuff like that. But I hadn't really heard that story. But again, it kind of goes back to the whole breaking codes. It doesn't matter what time it is, like getting intel, spies, information. I mean, it is such a big deal. And it's so interesting to see the different ways that people try to keep a leg up on the, information battle. So. All right, the Berlin Wall fall. Now, this is interesting because, again, it's every major human mistake that changed history forever. So they're saying it falling was like a mistake. I mean, the fall of the Berlin Wall was not a cause of something, really. It's an effect. I mean, maybe you could say that how the news that if you know about like the day that they were going to open up, movement between Berlin, and how that was kind of an accident made on like bad information and this and that. Like, okay, but I'm wondering how you can make this more like a cause than an effect. Let's see.
Günter Schabowski had recently become the unofficial spokesperson for East Germany's ruling Politburo, which was the top decision-making body of a communist party. The government had just held a meeting where they talked about easing some travel restrictions to West Germany, but they didn't want to announce it just yet. At a press conference, Schabowski brought...
I understand that stuff had been closed down since basically the 60s when the Berlin Wall went up. Basically from the end of World War II until the early 60s, you could move between the different sectors of Berlin, which were occupied by foreign countries, foreign allies from World War II. But then when the Berlin Wall goes up, boom, that thing stopped. And now fast forward to the late 80s, there's a lot of pressure as communist states are falling and try to maybe unify Germany once again. But okay, let's see what they're saying for mistakes.
But they didn't want to announce it just yet.
What's
At
the
a press
mistake?
conference, Schabowski brought this up,
Okay,
even though it wasn't meant to be made public yet.
Yeah.
A journalist asked when the new travel rules would take effect, and Schabowski, shuffling through his papers, didn't find an answer and ended up saying, "As far as I know, immediately."
Yeah, you can actually watch the clip of this. It's kind of funny. He really just kind of fumble around. He's kind of looking around and he's like immediately. He didn't even sound very confident when he did that. And if you there's documentaries and stuff on this. There was a bunch of journalists there, and they're kind of like looking at each other and they're like, "Wait, what? What did he just say?" Because it was so nonchalant. You know what I mean? Like this would be, it doesn't matter if it's quiet or if it's going to be loud. This is a huge deal. This is a Berlin that has been separated for decades, right? And the reporters are like, did he just say like, it's open? The border's open? You know what I mean? And then that leaked out to people in Berlin. And now understand, the guards and everybody that was like stationed around there had no idea about this stuff. They had no idea. So this kind of, gets out throughout the evening, and all of a sudden some of these Berliners, these like East Berliners, are showing up to the gate and they're being like, "Hey, did you hear like the wall? The gate, like we can go through." And of course the guys at the gate are like, "What? Like, I've never heard this." Talk to their supervisors. Supervisors are getting on the phone and stuff like that. And some of these supervisors, they call back and are like, "No, like we haven't heard anything. So just hold on." And then there was like one or two where they were like, "Okay, if they said that, they go through." And then so like one would open up and then all of a sudden they'd flood through. And I heard the story too that like some people had gone through, like some people like, they live on the east side. They're not like, "I'm leaving to go live on the west." They cross over just to basically do it and see it, walk a couple blocks. And then there was stories of those ones. They'd come back, and then the border, the guards there, they're not necessarily saying, "Oh, it's like free travel back and forth." So like some of them, they came back and they wouldn't be allowed in. The guard's like, "No, like you left. If you left, you're gone like forever." And they're like, "Wait, what?" And I remember there was this young couple, and they had gone out because I think they only lived like a block or two away. Their baby was asleep like in their apartment, and they're like, "But our baby's in there," like, whatever. So they let them go back. And then once they go back, like you let one person go back, you're going to let everybody. So through the night, it's a really interesting story. And by the end, it was just all the guards and stuff are just whatever, letting them through all the checkpoints. But maybe I overtalk what he's going to say, but I just think it is an interesting story how that night unfolded.
That one word changed everything. People in East Berlin, thinking the border was now open for the first time in 28 years, rushed to the Berlin Wall. Crowds gathered quickly, and the border guards were confused because they had no clear orders, but they'd also heard the press conference.
Yeah, you
Not
heard it.
knowing
You could
what
watch
else
on
to
TV.
do, they opened the gates and let people through.
Depends
Soon
on the
it turned
gate.
into a huge
Depends
celebration.
on the gate.
People were climbing the wall, crossing freely between east and west, hugging and cheering. Around 11:30 p.m. on November 9th, 1989, the Berlin Wall started falling. Some say Schabowski simply misunderstood. Others believe he knew exactly what he was doing.
Yeah.
The Four Pests campaign.
Now, it's interesting because it's not like, I don't think it's one of these things, though, where if, you know, that mistake hadn't happened, then like this wouldn't, the crossing of the borders and opening of gates like would never have happened. There was already pressure for that. But nevertheless, it sure didn't help the situation. This is like 1989, and things are really getting bad for the Soviet Union and all their communist allies. They're basically leaving the Soviet Union. They're voting out and getting out their own communist party officials. And I mean, it was kind of one of these cracks in the wall, if you'll say. All right, but yeah, that is interesting. Check out the news from that night is really actually interesting. All right.
Simply misunderstood. Others
Okay.
believe he knew exactly what he was doing. The Four Pests campaign. The Four Pests campaign was one of the first major efforts under Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward campaign. Its goal was to get rid of four
1959.
pests: rats, flies, mosquitoes, and sparrows, because they were thought to spread disease or damage crops.
Now, one of the things we found this out in the Soviet Union too, how horrible they were at dealing with this kind of stuff. They, like the Soviet Union, for example, was trying experimental techniques, you know, they called it science or whatever, but to try to improve agriculture, and it backfired and ends up creating more famine. And it just seems like the whole, I don't know if it's the the scientific community of these states just were not good enough, I guess. In fact, have backwards results.
Flies, mosquitoes, and
Communists make
sparrows,
bad scientists?
because
I
they
don't
were
know.
thought to spread disease or damage crops. The worst mistake was the war on sparrows, especially the Eurasian tree sparrow, which the government blamed for eating grain.
But they're gonna-
Millions of
they
people
don't
across
do
China,
that, though,
including
right?
children, were ordered to
Do they do
destroy
that?
sparrow nests, smash eggs, and bang pots and pans to stop the birds from landing until they died from exhaustion.
Oh my
This
gosh.
campaign, driven by propaganda and Mao's
I don't know
belief
much
that
about
man
this.
must conquer nature, almost wiped out sparrows in China. But without sparrows, insect and
Food
locust
chain.
populations grew out of control,
Yep.
since there were no birds to eat them.
There's that famous story in like the American West about, you know, like the locusts and stuff. And they're like, you know, they get saved by the seagulls. The seagulls ended up coming in, getting seagulls in who eat those. So, yeah, no, birds, they're our friends, man. They're our friends.
These insects destroyed crops, making China's food shortage even worse. This disaster, combined with bad farming policies and environmental mistakes, helped cause the Great Chinese Famine, which killed tens of millions of people.
Yeah, we don't know. The numbers are, you know, can be all over, but millions for sure. I think I've even heard up to 50 million. Now, there's a lot of different factors as well. The fact that also China is exporting grain, especially to the Soviet Union, who, you know, is having trouble trading with anybody. But because one thing China's trying to do is try to fuel their own kind of industrial revolution. And they don't have the funds, they don't have that stuff. But one thing they do have is an incredible amount of agriculture. But when you have food being exported, then on top of that, the food that you could be using is also going to waste or being destroyed like it is here. I mean, that's kind of a nasty effect. So yeah, this is the worst famine in modern history.
By 1960, the government quietly stopped the anti-sparrow campaign and began targeting bedbugs instead. Thomas Midgley Jr.'s fuel. In 1921, while working at General Motors,
Do I know
Thomas
this
Midgley
one? I
discovered
don't know if I
that
know
adding
this.
a chemical called tetrethyl
Yeah, I've
also
never
known
heard
as
of this.
teal, to gasoline, could stop engines from making knocking sounds. Early factories making teal saw
Knocking
workers
sounds?
suffer from hallucinations, mental illness, and even death.
What do they mean by knocking sounds? Like the media would have thought it was like you know backfiring that can happen because of what carburetors or whatever. But I'm not a mechanic. Okay, people are also getting sick.
Factories making teal saw workers suffer from hallucinations, mental illness, and
kinda
even death.
late-stage
Still, the
industrialism.
fuel was heavily promoted and quickly spread around the world. In the late 1920s, Midgley also helped create Freon, the first chlorofluorocarbon,
that's
or
horrible
CFC,
for the
to be
environment.
used as a safer cooling chemical in refrigerators.
But it's not,
It
right?
worked well and was later used in aerosol sprays and inhalers. But many years after Midgley's death, scientists found that CFCs were damaging the ozone layer, which protects Earth from harmful UV radiation.
You know, that is one thing, because the whole, like, when I was a kid, the ozone layer was like the big thing, you know, that you talked about, that our ozone, which was basically protecting us from, you know, harmful radiation, you know, that comes from the sun, and that there was thinning and like parts of the earth or whatever, it's going to, like, you know, ruin it. And it was actually like environmentally something that we actually saw like positive effects. Like you can see the ozone layer, I guess, has like healed itself because of very active global coalitions forming to get rid of some of these things that are specific for ozone protection. Like, again, that aerosol stuff. I remember that. It's like humans can actually have positive environmental changes globally. Kind of cool.
This discovery led to worldwide bans on CFCs.
Yeah.
At the time, Midgley's inventions seemed like smart solutions to real problems, but both unfortunately caused serious harm. A historian once said Midgley had more impact on the Earth's atmosphere than any other single human being. In 1944, after being paralyzed by polio, Midgley invented an elaborate system of pulleys and ropes to help others move him in and out of bed, but the device turned deadly. One day he became entangled in the ropes and was strangled to death, even though some say it was a case of suicide.
Dude, literally everything this guy's inventing is like killing people, right? We keep going with the ozone destruction because of the aerosol stuff, and then it ends up getting itself. Okay, this guy needs, I mean, I didn't want him to die, but like this guy shouldn't have been near any type of inventions.
Nuclear bear. We were seconds away from nuclear World War III, and the story is mostly unknown. It was around midnight during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the closest the world ever came to nuclear war during the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union. At a US military base in Duluth, a guard saw an unknown figure climbing the fence. At that time, US military planners believed that if the Soviet Union launched a nuclear attack, they might first try to sabotage American bases, thinking
because they're going to Duluth. So Duluth, Minnesota, it's on the coast there, Lake Superior, right? Somehow what they got through, I guess, Canada. Oh, this is so funny. This just shows you the nuclear hysteria, like absolutely hysteria. Like we don't think about it so much, you know, because the Cold War has ended, but like how real everybody thought that we were just so close to just like blowing up the planet, and that everyone is vulnerable, no matter where you are in the US, you know, it can be in Duluth.
The Soviet Union launched a nuclear attack, they might first try to sabotage American bases. Thinking this might be such an attack, the guard fired his weapon and triggered the sabotage alarm.
It's just like, it feels like, though, that there would be a list of things that you would think were like, okay, what would we assume first and second and third and whatever? But I feel like at the bottom, or not at the bottom, but definitely down a few, would be some Soviet dude climbing over a fence in Minnesota of a random base.
This alarm automatically went off at all nearby military bases.
There's more going on there
at one
that
base in Wisconsin, called Volkfield, there was a wiring mistake. Instead of a regular sabotage alert, the alarm there set off a klaxon siren, which told fighter jets armed with nuclear weapons to take off. The pilots were on DEFCON 3, a high alert level just below full-scale war. They had been clearly told there would be no practice drills at that level, so when they heard the signal, they believed World War III had started, and they were being ordered to launch. By the time the mistake was discovered, the jets were already heading toward the runway. An officer jumped into a car, sped to the runway, and managed to signal the pilots to stop.
I just imagine the dude ran out in the runway, and the jets coming at him, right? The jets coming at him, and he's just like, stop! And, you know, I guess they didn't run him over, but, oh, man. You know what? I just keep hearing more and more of these moments from the Cold War of how close we actually were to, like, blowing each other up. And not because the other nation, you know, so between Soviet and US, not because they were legitimately trying to do like a preemptive strike, like legitimately, but it's some stupid error by somebody did something really stupid. And it showed how close we were to just disaster multiple times. And I feel like as time goes on, we're going to hear more and more of these stories that get out, or they're like declassified or whatever. And I swear you hear a new one every, I don't know, especially covering YouTube content, like every few weeks, of how close we were to actually destroying this planet.
just in time to prevent a possible nuclear war. The figure that triggered it all? It was a bear. If it weren't for that officer speeding with his car, we wouldn't be here today.
Dude, that guy's the hero right there. All right, the bear, though, what did they do to the bear, you think? Are they sure? Did they vet him? Like, maybe he actually was a spy, though. Oh, Engineer Orban. Okay, love this story. You guys ready for the siege of Constantinople? And a fellow Christian? Hungarians, man. They just wanted some money. I'll let the story
refusal of Engineer Orban. In 1452, Orban, an engineer and iron founder from the Kingdom of Hungary, offered his help to Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI, but the empire didn't have enough money or resources to support his work.
Okay, you understand, this is cannons, right? Constantinople. It's got the most fortified walls there are. They're 30 feet thick, and there's multiple layers or whatever. The city's withstood 1,000 years of bombardment, right? Cannon technology. This is still cutting edge, especially the type of gunpowder and cannon work that could destroy the walls of a city like this. This is cutting edge. You got to be thinking, you got to be forward thinking a little bit here. And yeah, he's given a chance. You could defend yourself against the Ottomans because they are coming. Mehmet's on his way, man.
After being rejected, Orban went to the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed.
So did you hear that?
Money or resources to support his work. After being rejected, Orban went to the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II, who was...
Now, that's fair. Okay, I'm sorry I'm interrupting so much because there is some more to this. You said that, the Constantine, the emperor of the Byzantine Empire, money and resources to be able to pay for this. Because this guy ain't working for free. He's literally like, I got a cannon design. He also wanted a ton of money. I don't know if it was a documentary or something I think I had read recently. I forget what the amount was, but I remember when I saw it, and then I heard the equivalent to like today's money. It was an extraordinary amount of money. Like, I don't remember, fact check me on this or whatever, but something crazy like how much like the whole Byzantine military costs or something would be like what this guy was wanting. And so you can see this guy was in for the money. He don't give a crap about these, his Christian city, Orthodox Christians over here. I'm gonna go ahead and cross the Bosphorus. Go talk to the Ottomans. Actually, by that time, the Ottomans were on both sides of Constantinople. Byzantine Empire was literally just Constantinople at this point. A little speck.
To support his work. After being rejected, Orban went to the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II, who was preparing to attack Constantinople. Mehmed saw the value in Orban's ideas and gave him full support.
And in just
3 months, Orban built a huge cannon called the Basilic. It was so massive that it took 60 oxen to pull it. His cannon played a key role in the Ottoman siege of Constantinople in 1453, which led to the fall of the Byzantine Empire.
It didn't look like this at that time. I mean, you saw this map right here. It was literally just like Constantinople and a couple little like coastal region, little towns essentially. I mean, it was nothing like it once was. But when you look at it in the big picture, I mean, you remember Byzantine Empire is the Roman Empire. This is the end of them, or at least the takeover, because in a lot of ways, Mehmed, who by the way was very well versed in like Roman history and everything, he basically wanted to rule it. So it was like, my empire is going to envelop, like we're going to become the Roman Empire. Almost saw himself as just like a continuation of it in a lot of ways. So perspective is different here, but nevertheless, this also showed, that cannons were going to be the game changer in military history. I mean, because up to this point, you could hide behind walls. What are you going to do? I mean, you could talk about siege warfare and all that stuff, but it was so difficult, right, to be able to siege walled cities. And this now showed that with cannons, walls don't protect you anymore. We don't see a lot of that anymore. Walls protecting cities anymore. See why? It's pointless pretty much now. This is the beginning of the end of that era, the beginning of the gunpowder era,
which had lasted for over 1,000 years. Kim Jong-nam's Disneyland trip.
This is actually, it's sad, but it's actually kind of funny. So if you don't know this, yeah.
Kim Jong-nam, the oldest son of North Korean leader Kim Jong-il and half-brother of Kim Jong-un, was once expected to take over the country. In the late 1990s, he held top positions in the Ministry of Public Security and worked on developing North Korea's IT systems. But everything changed in 2001 when he was caught in Japan using a fake passport while trying to visit Tokyo Disneyland.
I like how this like mimicked me laughing when that seed popped up. Yeah. Now, the one thing about Kim Jong-il, the whole Kim's, Kim dynasty, right? The communist dynasty was that they were educated in how the outside world, functions. They did when they were younger, had done foreign trips and studied abroad and all that stuff. So they got a little bit of a taste, right, of the outside world. Unlike, so many people by this time in North Korea, and everyone loves Disneyland, right? So, but this is seen as like, this is like shameful. Disneyland. Right? What bigger, I don't know, like almost international example of like Western culture, even though it's going to be in Japan, but you know what I mean? And like capitalism and all this as Disneyland, right? It was an eyesore. It was an embarrassment to the family. And again, this guy, I mean, if you're looking at hierarchies, like he should be the next in line, right? To rule the country.
The incident embarrassed North Korea so much that his father canceled a planned visit to China and began quietly removing Jong-nam from power.
See, it's one of those things I like, no one else cares. Like it's only embarrassing to the state against their own state. Like no one else is like, that's embarrassing that he's over there. You know what I mean? It's pure just like image consciousness amongst your own like status quo that you've created.
That his father canceled a planned visit to China and began quietly removing Jong-nam from power. Over the next several years, he lived mostly in exile, moving between China, Macau, and parts of Southeast Asia. He sometimes gave interviews to foreign media and lived a more open, luxurious lifestyle than the rest of the secretive Kim family. Intelligence agencies believed he had connections to China and may have even worked as a CIA informant. After his younger half-brother Kim Jong-un was chosen as the next leader in 2010, Kim Jong-nam was seen as a potential rival. According to South Korean intelligence, Kim Jong-un gave a standing order to have him killed. Jong-nam survived several assassination attempts and even wrote a letter asking his brother to spare his life. On February 13, 2017, he was assassinated at the Kuala Lumpur airport in Malaysia after two women smeared the deadly VX nerve agent on his face.
If I remember right, this was a honeypot thing. What that is using a woman to seduce somebody into, either espionage, like to get like information, like a spy, or again to do assassination. I think I'd heard that he got honeypotted, right? Some sexy ladies or whatever came in and were able to get close to him.
The women were arrested, but claimed they thought it was a prank for a TV show. Most experts believe the killing was ordered by Kim Jong-un. While he was alive, Kim Jong-nam said the real reason he fell out of favor was his support for economic reforms and openness, ideas he picked up while studying in Switzerland. Rome's trust.
So saying these guys know Western ideas. They know them. It's just like, are you going to practice them or, whatever? And so far it's just not happening. You're not seeing in North Korea like a Deng Xiaoping type of reform and economic structure, like you saw with China, right? Maybe he would have been one of those guys. I don't know. All right, what do we got next? We're going back to Rome.
Economic reforms and openness, ideas he picked up while studying in Switzerland. Rome's trust in a Germanic noble. Publius Quintilius Varus, a Roman general in charge of the new province of Germania, trusted one of his own officers, a Germanic noble named Arminius. Arminius had been trained in Rome and served in the Roman army. But
this is kind of par for the course. The bigger the Romans got, the more that they recruited from their outside regions, from their conquered people. And by the time the late stages of the Roman Empire was full of non-Romans as far as in their military goes. People that don't have really a loyalty to the Roman government, you know what I mean? A Roman emperor, like, no, they're like Germanic people, or okay, they might be learning Latin or something. Like they've never been to Rome. They have no loyalty. So they call this like enemy in the gates, like within the gates kind of thing. Their military is full of these guys by this time.
He was secretly working to unite the Germanic tribes against Roman rule. That summer, as Varus and about 15,000 to 20,000 Roman soldiers marched back to their winter base, Arminius told him there was a small local rebellion that needed attention. Varus believed him and led his army into a dense, remote forest. There, the Roman troops were stretched out, slowed by bad weather and unable to fight in formation.
This is where the Romans have struggled a lot, actually, in these type of conditions. They're good in formation. They're very structured, but you can break that apart, use the geography to your advantage, right? That's hurt so many empires in history.
Then Arminius set off the trap. Over several days, the Roman legions were ambushed by Germanic warriors who knew the land and had set up hidden defenses. The Battle of the Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD started. Almost the entire Roman force was wiped out, and Varus committed suicide during the battle. The loss was so devastating that Rome gave up its plans to conquer land beyond the Rhine River.
That's a big deal because, you know, they've been knocking on those doors since, you know, Caesar's days. There's the expansion. Great point of Germanic pride, you know, even to these days. They withstood the Romans like so few had.
Emperor Augustus never again pushed for expansion into northern Germany. The legions destroyed in the battle's numbers were never used again. Many of the Germanic tribes that would later invade and weaken the Western Roman Empire came from this very region that Rome failed to control after Teutoburg. Germany's D-Day.
You know, in a lot of ways, it shows you how Rome was overstretched. You know what I mean? There's just like the bigger you get, the more variables that you have to be able to control. And obviously the more variables that you have to control, the more likely it is to have one that you can't control. And I think that was happening there. Now, Rome still did plenty of expansion after this time. They're going to go into more like kind of like the Northern Balkan regions and kind of work with that. You can see that with Trajan. But yeah, kind of done up there in Central Europe, huh? All right, D-Day. Is this going to be a mistake? Was there a mistake at D-Day? Let's see what's going on. Maybe Mr. Mustache Man not taking the news or the, you know, advice that the invasion is going to be happening in Normandy and not Calais. Let's see if that's what they talk about.
Decisions. In the months before D-Day, German commanders disagreed about where the Allied invasion would happen. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt believed it would come at Pas de Calais.
There's a good region there. Like he's showing it right here. Do you see on the map? This is the shortest part of the English Channel. It's also a big port city. And but they're going to fortify the Germans under Hitler. They're going to fortify Calais. Didn't they get like 1 million or something to basically defend that? Now, there's a lot of territory. This whole, you know, front here that the Germans have to, you know, be able to protect. But you remember, like a sizable invasion, like what D-Day is going to require, which is going to, you know, put 1 million to 2 million people in that first month or two over the weeks. It's a lot to defend, but it's still geography. When you have that many people, you got to have a very favorable geography, big beaches that you can land a lot of ships and do that. So, you know, it's a lot of mileage of territory you have to defend, but so that at the time there's still only certain ones you can do. And one of those good places, a couple hundred miles west here, of course, at Normandy, and that's coming up, right?
Invasion would happen. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt believed it would come at Pas de Calais, the closest point between Britain and France, with key ports and a direct route into Germany. Erwin Rommel, in charge of coastal defenses, also focused on Calais, but warned that the Allies could land anywhere, including Normandy, where they eventually did land. Hitler, as usual, couldn't make up his mind. He split the German tank divisions between the two plans, placing some too far inland to help Rommel quickly, but not far enough to act as a proper mobile reserve as Rundstedt wanted. In the end, neither commander got what they needed. Meanwhile, the Allies launched a deception campaign called Operation Fortitude.
Yes, they're going to bring in the inflatable army. God, I love this. You know, this is one of those, like, you know, failures or whatever we talk about that definitely seems more failure-y in retrospect, right? Because obviously if they had gone to Calais, then it probably would not have gone very well for the Allies. They already were very, very reluctant to think that the D-Day invasions will work. I mean, even Eisenhower, go read his letter that he had drafted for if D-Day fails. But anyway, I love Operation Fortitude. If you don't know the story, you should laugh when you hear this. It's so great.
Got what they needed. Meanwhile, the Allies launched a deception campaign called Operation Fortitude, tricking the Germans into thinking the real attack would be at Calais. Even after the Allies landed in Normandy on the 6th of June 1944, German leaders, including Hitler, thought it might just be a distraction.
Right.
Rommel happened to be away visiting his wife for her birthday that day, and other officers were also off duty because of bad weather forecasts. Rundstedt asked for permission to move reinforcements, but Hitler delayed the decision. By the time a counterattack was approved, Allied air forces had already damaged German supply lines and troop movements, and the German command structure was falling apart. Despite fierce resistance, the Allies secured 5 beachheads on D-Day and brought in over 150,000 troops. Rommel...
Yeah, just on that day alone. And then I think it was 1 million after the first month or something like that. I think under 2 million were basically stationed on the southern coast of England, which is impossible to hide no matter what your tactics are to try to hide that. The Germans knew there was a massive army that was developing there in the south. Okay, I do want to go back to Operation Fortitude if they don't clarify. I don't think they're going to talk about it because you're wondering, and if you don't know, why it looked like 4 dudes were holding up a tank. I want to tell you.
Later tried to tell Hitler that Germany's defenses were collapsing, but Hitler refused to believe it. Then, on the 17th of July, Rommel was seriously injured when Allied planes attacked his car. With Rommel out and confusion still spreading through the German leadership, Germany lost its chance to stop the invasion. Russia's Alaska.
Okay, so get to. All right, I just love telling the story. It's one of the things I always make sure to sneak into my lessons just because it's so fun to talk about. Operation Fortitude. So, obviously the Germans, they know that something is happening. You know what I mean? Like, there's going to be an invasion. Again, they can't hide it. It's impossible, right? And there were a lot of different things that the Allies were doing. They were trying to jam radars and all that. And there was a lot of deception going on. And even the fact, I think that when word got even back to Hitler that there was starting to be like an invasion on Normandy, I think there was still justification to think that, okay, like that's doesn't mean they're not going to be at Calais. You know what I mean? Okay, it could be distraction or whatever, or maybe it's going to be that's just one of the locations. Maybe they're coming up to Calais. But it does seem like that, even when it seemed like this was the big one, he waited too long. But my favorite of all the distraction things that they did was this one. So, first off, George Patton, all right, he's been sidelined because he got in trouble. Media got hold that he basically hit and beaten up a PTSD soldier. He did not believe in PTSD. He basically just thought that you were a big coward if you had those type of psychological effects from war. Patton, screw loose. The stuff doesn't affect him, right? Anyway, so they had to they suspended him. And funny enough, the Germans and like Hitler heard about that. He knew all about Patton. Patton was very successful, and they thought that was a lie. Like no, you're not going to sideline your best general. What? Because he smacked up a soldier. He's probably like, dude, we kill him. We kill our guys that do that. At the very least, smack him up. So. Basically, it was a diversion, right? Like he's up. Would he have been, in the southeastern part of England or whatever? And it looks like that he is preparing an army, possibly for a Calais invasion, right? And where he is located, they wanted to make it look like, that there is an army developing and growing and being built to do a massive invasion across the English Channel on that side, right on the east side there. So, the Germans, they take, all kinds of photography and all this stuff. And, they start seeing these photographs and these staging areas where it looks like all these tanks are like you see on the screen. And, like there could be planes and like artillery and jeeps. And it looks like just a massive army, right, is developing there. It was all fake. This is inflatable. That's why these guys are holding it up. You can actually see the hose coming out of the bottom right here. They had the U.S. Army. This is so brilliant. Had hired Hollywood prop builders, like people that make sets and stuff for Hollywood movies, right? And because they're so good at it, and they made these. And when you look at it from like a black and white photo from the 1940s, these things look real. I mean, look at them right now. If that was sitting on the ground, I wouldn't be none the wiser. Okay, you get real close, and especially if you could find a picture of them holding it up, that's going to be a little different. But it was perfectly reasonable to think that that was all happening. And it's so funny. So that's one of the things, too. Hitler's like, the big invasion's going to be with Patton, and took the bait. So anyways, one of my favorite deceptions in war stories there. If you guys have anything more to add, I know some of you guys, so many of you guys are, World War II files and love this stuff. If you want to add anything else, I'd love to hear what you guys got. Some of you I know you live for this World War II stuff, but let's go ahead and move on. We are getting deep into the video, and it's just over halfway, but I'm having a lot of fun. Hope you guys are too. All right, Alaska. All right, thanks, Russia. Here we go.
Through the German leadership, Germany lost its chance to stop the invasion. Russia's Alaska sale. In 1867, the Russian Empire sold Alaska to the United States for $7.2 million, about 2 cents per acre. After losing the Crimean War, Russia feared it couldn't defend Alaska in a future war, especially against Britain, whose forces were nearby in Canada. Selling the territory to the U.S. was seen as a way to block British expansion. At the time, many Americans mocked
Canada, essentially.
The deal as Seward's to block British expansion. At the time, many Americans mocked the deal as Seward's folly, as the negotiations were led by U.S. Secretary of State William Seward.
Right.
They called Alaska
Seemed like a
a
waste.
useless, frozen wasteland. The purchase gave the U.S. strategic access to the Pacific and added territory more than twice the size of Texas, full of natural resources like oil and various minerals and metals.
See, and this is what a lot of this gets discovered after, like not long after. And remember, this is the 1860s. This is before we're using oil for, stuff in the idea of like fuel and things like that. So pretty amazing that like right after this, they start finding gold and oil is going to become very important about starting, I'd say 10 years after this purchase. When you're starting to get to like the 1880s, that's when they talk about the second industrial revolution is kind of beginning at the time. That's when we're shifting away from a lot of coal, steam engine stuff and start moving into oil as energy. And then gold is gold, right? So yeah, it ends up being a big deal. But I mean, you could be skeptical of it at the time. But now, I mean, obviously it's a big deal because of how rich it is in resources.
Alexander the Great leaving no heir.
Okay. Like that being a mistake, I guess. I mean, the empire's going to continue.
When Alexander the Great died in 323 BC, he left behind the largest empire the world had ever seen, but no clear successor. His only direct heir was an unborn child, and his half-brother Aridaeus had serious mental disabilities. Without a stable plan for who would rule next, Alexander's top generals, known as the Diadochi, rushed to grab power. What followed was nearly 50 years of brutal conflict called the Wars of the Diadochi. These former allies, who had once helped Alexander conquer lands from Greece to India, turned on each other. They formed shifting alliances, betrayed one another, and fought bloody civil wars to control pieces of the empire. Right. The result was the permanent breakup of Alexander's empire into rival kingdoms and decades of war across the ancient world. One by one, most members of the royal family, including his son Alexander IV, were murdered during the power struggles. By 281 BC, his empire had broken apart into several major rival kingdoms. The long-term effects were huge. Alexander's dream of a unified empire connecting East and West died with him. Instead, the split led to centuries of regional conflict and helped pave the way for the rise of Rome. All of it happened because one of history's greatest conquerors failed to plan for what would happen after his death.
But Rome, I mean, okay, I got a lot to say about this. So I think more importantly, even probably less than not having a clear successor in a lot of ways, was just the fact that he died young, right in the campaign. They were regrouping after they kind of were getting kicked in over in Western India, but he dies young, right? He dies and suddenly. He's like 32, dies of, whatever you want to say, the poisoning, bad health, whatever. And that right there was already a problem because the institutions were not ready yet to govern themselves, I think, regardless of if he had some like clear heir. Okay. Now, the impact on these regions, I still think would probably be the same because what ends up happening here is on his deathbed and it says that, let my generals figure it out. And then the three big ones break up the empire. You're going to get the Seleucid Empire. It's going to rule over Persia and Tigonid over in basically Greece. And then famously the Ptolemaic Empire in Egypt. And they still had the massive Greek influence, right? They were seen as foreigners. They brought in the Greek elements. They call it Hellenism, basically the Greekification of these areas still happen, even if there wasn't a successor. Yeah, you have that. And again, if he had like a successor, would that have really like kept this big stable empire? I don't know. I don't have a hard time believe that. And the effect that it's going to have on Rome, I don't know if I buy that in as much, especially because most of the empire was not even going to be the places that Rome takes over anyways. I mean, they don't get Greece like Egypt till, later. And yeah, they are going to get into Greece and stuff, but like all the Persia stuff, no. I mean, out of the ashes, eventually you're going to get the Sasanian Empire centuries later that is going to do just fine, keeping the Romans at bay. So I don't know. I don't know if this being like this major human mistake. I think it's a bigger deal, just the fact that they conquered so quickly and then he died so young. I think that is the bigger, I don't know if you want to call it a mistake, but the bigger event. Okay, here we go.
Columbus's miscalculation.
Absolutely.
Christopher Columbus's discovery of the Americas happened because of a major mistake.
Math.
At the time, many scholars already had a pretty good idea of the Earth's actual size,
right,
thanks to earlier work by thinkers like Eratosthenes.
Yeah, they knew that since the BC era. In fact, Eratosthenes lived in Egypt. He was part of that whole educated class that is going to that comes from from the Greeks, essentially, who were ruling over Egypt. Alexandria, one of the places that Alexander was adamant on, building as a major port city, gets named after him, like a lot of places were. That is one of the interesting effects of Alexander, even without him having the heir, is the almost like ancient scientific revolution that basically breaks out in his empire after he dies, when places like Alexandria become these educational havens for mathematicians and philosophers and writers and all these guys that you probably heard of, Eratosthenes being one who was very look into how he does it, but was very accurate actually in calculating the Earth's circumference. So, but the big idea being that, that like everyone knew the Earth was round. That was a weird myth. I don't know how that ended up even coming to be, because you may have even been told as a kid, like before, like Columbus time, like they thought you'd sail over the edge of the Earth, and it's like, no, that was never a thing. I should try to look into where that mistake got perpetuated, the historiography, if you will, of the shape of the Earth.
But Columbus rejected those accurate estimates. He wrongly believed the Earth was much smaller than it really is, and thought Asia stretched much farther east than it does. Based on this wrong math, Columbus argued that Japan could be reached by sailing west from Europe in just a few weeks.
Yep. His brother was influential on this. He was very tight with his brother, and if I remember right, his brother was the one that was especially adamant. And from what I believe I've heard too, is basically the math that Columbus was getting, like from his brother, was not the same mathematical formula and units that most people were using. They're using different units that didn't basically translate. So, when you would look at a number of something, it was actually, when you translate it, didn't mean the same amount of distance as what he thought originally, right? There was a different type of numbering system, something like that. So it kind of made sense, but just the fact that they were so adamant when everybody was telling him he was wrong, which was true. It's not like people believed him about it. So that's why he got turned down. He got turned down from everybody. He's Italian. Italian merchants, investors want nothing to do with him. The Portuguese, who are killing it when it comes to overseas exploration, they're like, nah, y'all are crazy. England wants nothing to do with them. And, Spain is going to do it. They just conquered the rest of Spain, the Reconquista. And they're like, we'll throw some money your way. Maybe you can find some more people for us to crusade. All right, Ferdinand and Isabella there. But yeah, he thought basically you could get to Asia in like less than a month by sailing west, and that doesn't happen. It was a couple months, and even then he got real lucky here.
Most experts disagreed and believed the trip would be far too long. Still, the Spanish crown decided to fund the voyage, impressed by his confidence and calculations. Ironically, if Columbus had used the correct numbers, the journey would have seemed too long and too risky.
Right. Except they had turned him down before. This was not the first time he had approached them. Okay, it was just that year, 1492, in the kind of late winter, early spring, is when they finished the Reconquista and are like, okay, now we'll do it. So he was adamant. He tried to be, and I guess props to Columbus for using that whole political situation of the Reconquista to his advantage, because he did try to market it. He's like, hey, you're like this new nation now, basically. We can get you wealth. We can get you gold. We can get you more Christians. Maybe we can find some more, Muslims to crusade against. He kind of campaigned himself that way, and that worked at that time.
And he probably never would have set sail. In the end, it was only because of his miscalculation and the surprise presence of the American continents in the way that his voyage succeeded. Treaty of Versailles.
Yeah, you also get to see too. Now, let's go to the map here. He's going to go to the Azores, I believe, on the mission. You got to look at the map of like his routes. It is not a direct, just straight Western like voyage here. Let me show you.
Miscalculation and the surprise presence of the American continents.
Okay, so the Azores are these islands the western coast of Africa, controlled by Portugal at that time, and it's kind of the last of the islands that were really colonized before you get to really the heart of the Atlantic, right? And again, I thought it'd just be a few weeks when he gets there. Also, Norm will know more about the ocean currents, and what happens is he kind of, because Spain is clear up here. I don't know if you can see my mouse. I'm on the west coast of Spain here. You know, it's not just going to be like direct sailing, you know, and it's different, of course, around our globe. You know, he gets sent down because of ocean currents in the Western Hemisphere. So north of the equator, the ocean in the Atlantic goes clockwise here. So you end up, as you're sailing away towards the center of the ocean, you're going to naturally get pulled southwest, which is what happens. So he gets down here, gets closer more towards the equator, not going to cross it, but then gets blown down here into the Caribbean. And luckily for him, ends up hitting some of the islands around the Bahamas, not even the, you know, mainland coast, which helps too, because they were on the brink of mutiny. You can read his journals. You really should. I think it's one of the most important primary source documents we have in history is his journals, and talked about how, you know, the estimates about how long this would take. I mean, they're gone, right? And his you know, crewmates, they're not very happy. They want to turn back. They want to do this and that, and then eventually they, you know, hit that. But yeah, because of those ocean currents and also the fact that the Americas were there, was again super lucky. We would never have heard of Columbus if the Americas did not exist there. And we all know what, you know, how that's going to change history. One of the most important things that's ever happened when you look at how it's affected modern history, for sure. Anyway, more stories there. Yeah, you should read his journal, though. You know, read about what he talks about the people. Said they were very kind, like they were good looking, but he also says they could easily be coerced. And, you know, if you know about the brutality that happened there, then you can see where that comes from. But anyway, all right. I already saw Treaty of Versailles. Yeah, we got to put this
way that his voyage succeeded. Treaty of Versailles' harsh terms. The Treaty of Versailles was signed in 1919 after World War I, and it placed very tough conditions on Germany that affected the country's future and possibly changed the path of world history. The treaty forced Germany to take full blame for the war, give up land, greatly shrink its military, and pay huge amounts of money to the Allied powers.
Now, something to add, too, is when the treaties, because there were a few leading up to this, because the Ottoman Empire had fallen, Austria-Hungary had fallen. In those treaties as well, those countries also had to assume blame for the war, right? They had to do that, actually written in there. But of course, the big one is going to be Germany because, you know, they have the biggest effect, and the reparations that they're about to get handed is going to ruin them, of course. But yeah, the war guilt clause, that's going to be something that you're going to see the fascists use basically as ammunition to their platform.
Give up land, greatly shrink its military, and pay huge amounts of money to the Allied powers. Many Germans felt these demands were unfair and deeply humiliating, especially because they had expected peace talks to follow U.S. President Wilson's more generous 14 points.
For sure. Yeah, if you don't know, you hopefully you heard about the 14 points in your history classes, even like your, you know, high school classes or whatever. But yeah, go over them. I think if Wilson's plans, of course, had been adopted, it would have been a lot better. It does actually avoid a lot of the things that end up being causes for World War II. But that just wasn't the case. I mean, you're going to get some of it, like the United Nations is going to be created, even though, the League of Nations is going to be created, although the U.S. never joins it. But wanted, you know, a reduction in arms, wanted a demilitarization across the board, but they only, you know, implemented that on Germany essentially. So yeah, it was pretty bad. But kind of like, I guess you would say, the failure of the intelligence and decision making and defending in D-Day for Germany. The Treaty of Versailles is definitely one of those things that makes a lot more sense of how harsh it was written when you're looking at, if you're looking at the perspective of those that were actually there in 1918, 1919, if you're the French, if you're the British, right? The for them, peace means, you know, defanging Germany, right? That's what peace means. And especially when you feel like you're the victims, like especially France had, and you can see it on the armistice deal too, but that they, to them, that's completely reasonable to do all these things. They're going to be very, very harsh. So again, it's very easy in 2025 and not long after to be like, man, the Treaty of Versailles was a mistake at the get-go. But context is very important. And yeah, for sure. Like, yeah, in context or in retrospect, yeah, this was very much something that's going to, it's not going to solve the problems that led to World War One, and it's going to almost ensure that this is more just an armistice for a Second World War. But I think it is important to understand it in its context as somebody in 1918.
The British economist John Maynard Keynes called the treaty a Carthaginian peace, meaning it was designed to crush Germany rather than build lasting peace. He warned that the harsh financial penalties would hurt both Germany and Europe. In Germany, the feeling of injustice was widespread. Millions of ethnic Germans ended up living outside the country's new borders, and the loss of land and military strength fueled anger and nationalism.
And it was so easy to campaign on that stuff. All these veterans of the war that have basically now interpreted the end of this war and this peace treaty, that they fought for nothing and they watched all their friends die and all this stuff. It was humiliating. It was perfect ammunition to basically counter immediately and try to pretty much punish and get rid of all those that are involved with the signing of these treaties, and why the Weimar Republic, is going to be seen maybe as weak and ineffective. And yeah, there you go. And we all know who's going to rise from these ashes.
This frustration helped extremist politics grow, especially during the Great Depression, when Adolf Hitler rose to power.
Which started very early
was
for
not
Germany.
The only reason for World War II. Its harsh terms and the way people remembered them played a big part in the rise of Nazism.
So yeah, that's the big question. And I guess you guys can answer this. We're getting into some hypotheticals. Maybe a good potential alternate history episode. If you guys didn't know, we've started an alternate history series on my channel. I'm working with a writer as well as an editor, and the three of us together, we started an alternate history series. And it has the first episode's out. It's what if Stalin had survived his stroke and continued to rule the Soviet Union. Next one coming out, which is should be in kind of post-production now, is what if Trotsky actually became the leader of the Soviet Union and not Stalin. But maybe an interesting one that we could consider, and I'll have to brainstorm with these guys, if the Treaty of Versailles was more fair. I don't know, maybe all the things that okay, how about this? How about if the 14 points had been in the Treaty of Versailles and all of the things that it was advocating for, what would the history be or the future be? Would there be a Nazi party, right? Would Adolf Hitler have been successful in politics? Do you guys think that would be a good one? By the way, I'll link our first episode of Alternate History. The running title right now, it's kind of corny. History, Histerry. It's a running thing, but that's the series. I'll link it down below. Check it out.
The Maginot Line. The Maginot Line was a large system of defenses that France built along its border with Germany after World War I. It was not meant to make France completely safe, but to slow down a German attack, give France time to get its army ready, and keep future battles away from French land.
I should add another thing about this. This is a public works program. Keynes, the guy we were talking about earlier, and common economic theory was that the government needs to, during the Great Depression, basically sponsor works and work programs for people because unemployment is so bad because the markets are in ruin. And one of those, when you talk about public works, what we're talking about is jobs that are meant to build up infrastructure basically for the public, right? So the United States, that was a big thing that happened in the New Deal, right? People were going to be building roads and dams and harbors and, again, infrastructure projects. Germany did the same thing. The Nazis were doing that. They were doing that as well. And this was also one of those things that was to get people working. It gave contracts to construction companies and stuff like that. So it was kind of like a win-win situation. But especially, though, when you remember World War I, about how, as much of the German offensive did not go through the German-French border, it came through Belgium, that it's kind of interesting to think about that, because that's where the Maginot Line is going to be built, and we'll see if he shows that.
The line was built in the 1930s, partly because Germany was becoming stronger, and France could not count on help from Britain or the United States. France had fewer young men after World War I and chose a defensive plan to make up for its smaller army. The Maginot Line ran from Switzerland to Luxembourg and had underground bunkers, big guns, and strong fortifications.
It really was amazing. Look at like what the Maginot Line had. It was a wonder. I mean, it was like the modern Great Wall of China.
But it did not protect the Ardennes Forest or the border with Belgium very well, because those areas were wrongly seen as too hard for a major army to cross.
And there's other reasons. There's political reasons. Obviously, like, Belgium may not be down with having this most fortified, technologically advanced, militarized border in history on their border with their friends, the French here. But nevertheless, they also said the Maginot Line was going to continue on, and there was like, I mean, you saw this map. This is actually a famous one. I've pulled up in my slides and my lessons, where you see the thick red line here is really like the heart of it. But this is also an area that can be hard to cross too. Rhine River here, by the way. This was also territory that was taken by France as a result of the Treaty of Versailles, which was economically very damaging for Germany there, because around this river, because there's industrial cities there. But these little red dots are supposed to be like minor fortifications. And they're hoping, though, and Belgium, though, I believe, was telling them, like, no, we're gonna like protect our border, like you're not gonna need to maybe do as much like you're doing down here in the south. Like we'll get you covered. And it doesn't happen. Now you probably know the story. Germany's gonna come sweeping through Belgium once again, just like World War I. But in a lot of ways, hey, you could also see the Maginot Line as success. Germany avoided it. They avoided it. So it's like, isn't that a sign of success? It would have been almost would have been a bigger mistake is if Germany just plowed right through it in their initial invasion. That would be like the real tragic thing.
Belgium very well, because those areas were wrongly seen as too hard for a major army to cross.
It was hard.
In 1940, Germany avoided the line by going through Belgium and the Ardennes, surprising the Allies.
Just like
the
World
parts
War
of the
I.
line that were attacked.
Yeah, I don't know if it's like Pikachu surprise face, but
going through Belgium and the Ardennes, surprising the Allies. The parts of the line that were attacked mostly held firm, but it had already been bypassed. After the war, people disagreed about whether the Maginot Line was a good idea. Operation Barbarossa.
I mean, again, I told you it was a works program as well, so take that for what it is. There were a lot of things militarily wrong that France ended up going on with France than just the Maginot Line. There were a lot of things. You can't just chalk it up to that. You know what I mean? You can visit a lot of parts of the Maginot Line, interestingly, because so many parts of it are basically untouched. Operation Barbarossa, yeah, you got to put this on a mistake
the war,
list.
People disagreed about whether the Maginot Line was a good idea. Operation Barbarossa. Operation Barbarossa, launched by Nazi Germany in June 1941, was one of the worst military misjudgments in history. It was supposed to be a quick and easy invasion of the Soviet Union, meant to defeat...
You know how I've given you the explanation, or the idea that so many of these failures we judge a lot harsher now than you would have at the decision-making process, given the information we know now. This is one of those ones where it's like, was this ever going to be a good idea? Right? Especially when the Germans and the Soviets were, like not fighting. I mean, they had deals. They were like trading with each other. They weren't messing with each other, basically like in Poland and all that stuff and whatever. And that usually lends people to believe that this was always something that Adolf Hitler was planning. I mean, again, it's Lebensraum, all this area east of Poland are going to be land for the Germans to, populate living space. But this is one of those things where it's like, can you have the rose-colored glasses? Do you think there is any trying to get rid of future bias and stuff like that of how this was a bad decision from the beginning? I mean, I think you can, especially when you look at the history, of course, of European nations trying to invade into Russia and all that, Napoleon's failures and all that. But I don't know. What do you think? Do you think we should scale back the decision to do Operation Barbarossa, not considering how it actually ends?
The Red Army in just a few weeks, but instead it turned into the largest and deadliest front of World War II. At first, the Germans made huge gains, surrounding and killing or capturing hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops in places like Kiev and the Sea of Azov.
And it was so freaking brutal what they did to those people, the killings and the rapes and what happens. And it just fueled, even in a lot of cases, even worse war crimes that the Soviets will do when they retake this stuff. If you guys listen to the famous podcast series, Ghosts of the Ostfront by Dan Carlin, he goes under some, talks about some of those stories and that how the Soviets basically just in their counter offensive, because their people had been so, all the war crimes against them basically gave them a free pass to like commit their own and even do it worse. It's just so bad. Just wrongs that were countered with just more wrongs. It's so sad.
By late 1941, they were close to key cities like Leningrad and Moscow. But the invasion began to stall. Cold weather, long supply lines, strong Soviet resistance, and poor planning all slowed the German advance.
Now, the one thing you may hear, and maybe some of y'all in chat are saying, not saying if you're a German apologist or something, was the resource richness, the more immediate resource necessity of like oil, especially down near Stalingrad and the Volga River and those areas, that those became pretty much necessary for the German military goals that they had, because it becomes a resource war as this war goes on and on and on. You know, is that an argument about why it may have been a good idea to do this?
Leningrad was not taken.
Leningrad was
Soviet resistance
so
and
bad,
poor
though.
planning all slowed the German advance. Leningrad was not taken, but instead was surrounded, leading to a terrible siege that killed over 1 million civilians.
They also, yeah, 1 million civilians. They also were starving to death. I've heard stories that there was cannibalism in Leningrad. Yeah, awful.
Mostly from starvation. Near Moscow, German forces got within sight of the Kremlin, but were pushed back by a surprise Soviet counterattack, helped by Siberian troops brought in for defense.
Yeah, I love talking about this in my classes, because you know how the whole Russia in the winter thing, and they're now getting into that because, you know, if you're going to fight the Russians, you got to make sure, I guess, you're finished in the winter, or at least pause or something like that. But the thing was, by now the end of 41 here, is that the reinforcements are coming in, right? The reinforcements are coming in for the Soviets. And where are these dudes coming from?
Pushed back by a surprise Soviet counterattack, helped by Siberian troops.
Siberian troops, okay? Siberia is like the coldest place on Earth, right? And there's been Russian settlers and stuff there. And these guys can absolutely fight in the winter. These guys are like part ice. They're basically snowmen, and they can come in pretty much looking like this, which is not cold for them. They come in flip-flops and Hawaiian t-shirts and Tommy Bahamas. I love telling my students about this. And yeah, when they're coming in, they have no problem fighting in the winter, and the Germans do. Their stuff isn't working. They're freezing to death, right? Hitler basically doesn't believe on strategic retreats and stuff like that. It's just, you just fight harder. It's dumb. But yeah, these guys, when these guys start showing up, it's like, it's done.
Brought in for defense. By the end of 1941, Germany had lost over 800,000 soldiers. The failure of Barbarossa led Hitler to take direct control of the army, which often made things worse.
Thing is, Soviet Union will lose more. With Stalingrad was about 800,000 died, Germans, but it took 1.2 million Soviets to die in that. Now, there's some reasons for that. You know, Stalin was not one to also evacuate certain areas. You know, he felt that basically in some of these cities, it's like, if you keep the civilians there, then their soldiers will fight harder, to protect them. And it's just, it's basically like human shield kind of stuff. It's tragic. And if you wanted to defect or anything, basically you just, if you were going to retreat, the next line of soldiers pretty much armed or told to kill you. Both sides basically were doing that. There's no retreat. You will get killed by your own people if you try to retreat.
As Germany struggled, the Soviet Union started pushing west,
so many unnecessary deaths,
and eventually gaining control of huge parts of Eastern Europe.
What
started as a plan to defeat the Soviet Union ended up creating the Eastern Bloc and setting the stage for the Cold War. More people died on the Eastern Front than in all other battles of World War II combined.
And a lot of battles in history. This is the deadliest front of any war ever. We're talking deaths here, that surpass like World War I, like the whole thing combined. Right, in one front. Okay, another World War I?
More people died on the Eastern Front than in all other battles of World War II combined.
What's the next
one? A wrong turn in World War I.
All right, Archduke time. Here we go.
The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand happened on June 28th, 1914,
that is funny to think about.
In Sarajevo. And the Archduke was killed not because of a perfect plan, but because of a mistake.
Right.
Earlier that day, there had been a failed bomb attack on his motorcade.
Yeah.
For safety, the drivers were told to change the route, but the message didn't reach them. By accident, the Archduke's car turned onto a side street, where one of the would-be assassins, Gavrilo Princip, was standing.
Well, there were multiple mistakes there. First off, he had left. Like, after that bomb, he didn't just immediately get killed after he directed his directed his car away from like this initial bomb. No, they were done. Like it was over. He goes back to the hotel or something, but it had killed another car in the motorcade here. And we can talk way more in other videos if we cover stuff about more of the events. I'm really interested in the assassination and what kind of went into it. But anyway, one of the people in one of the other cars was he the general? I forget what his exact role was, and he had been hospitalized. And so later in the day, Archduke Franz Ferdinand wants to go visit him. Right, which is probably a dumb idea too, because he's just been attacked in the city of Sarajevo, which is not very welcomed in. But anyway, so that was one of the mistakes too. If he just stayed back and like hunkered down and just, you know, wait out the storm, he just got away with assassination attempts. A whole bunch of people were trying to assassinate him and they all failed. But yeah, coming back out, I think, was almost the bigger mistake. But this makes it even worse when you could have been safe by, you know, going to the hospital of a certain route, but don't go a certain way, huh? By the way, you know, it was really stupid too about the initial essentially parade that he was doing there was that he, which in retrospect was a bad idea. They had published, you know, of course, where it was. They wanted people in Sarajevo to come and, you know, see the Archduke and published it in newspapers what the route was. And the Black Hand, the assassin group, is going to be like, oh, well, now we know where to post people. And, you know, they failed at that time.
Turned onto a side street where one of the would-be assassins, Gavrilo Princip, was standing. Gavrilo was there because after the failed bomb attack, he decided to go get some food. The driver tried to reverse the car, but stalled the engine, giving Princip the perfect chance to shoot.
He doesn't know how to use a stick. Y'all kids don't know about manual transmissions, do you?
The driver tried to reverse the car, but stalled the engine, giving Princip the perfect chance to shoot Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie at close range.
He was pregnant.
That wrong turn led to far more than 2 deaths. It set off a chain reaction. Within weeks, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, alliances between countries took effect, and what could have stayed a local conflict turned into World War I.
Do you guys think you can pinpoint that much of it on the assassination? Now, absolutely, the assassination sets the timeline that we know for World War I. But a lot of you have probably been taught that there were a lot of ingredients already there for this conflict to happen. It just needed something to spark it. What do you guys think about the inevitability or lack thereof of World War I if this assassination doesn't happen? Right? Does it just mean, okay, the Black Hand tries another one later at another time? Like, would this be the one and only time that this assassination could have happened? If there was never going to be assassination, maybe the Black Hand does give up and they don't want to do one again, and there isn't one. Would that then mean that World War I would have been diverted? I don't know. You just wonder if there would have been some other type of event. And when you look at what happens very quickly in the days and weeks after the assassination here, it's definitely proof that we show that we can use to say they were ready for war. They were just waiting for something to happen. But what do you guys think about another alternate history? Man, I should put this down as a topic too. This assassination attempt fails. That'd be another one. Would you like to see that? Let me know down below. All right, looks like that's it.
If you liked this video, subscribe for similar ones.
Holy cow. All right. We are well over an hour. I swear my reactions are getting a lot longer. Let me give you you guys my final thoughts here. All right. Now, this was a good list. One of the things that you guys, if you're hanging out with me still, thank you so much. What else do you think should be on a list? How many did we have here? Maybe a dozen or so different things. What are other, I guess, mistakes? And I guess we should focus on that change history forever. Not necessarily just events that change history forever, because we have a lot of those, but mistakes. Are there any others you think that should fall in this same line? Because they did bring up a few that really were momentous in what happened afterwards. And if you want to chalk them up to a mistake, whatever. But what other mistakes would you think should be on a list like this? But anyways, went on way long, over an hour here, but I love talking about the stuff. Again, you hung out with me. Thank you. Channel members, special shout out to you guys. You guys got to see this video first, so thank you for joining up. And with that, you guys, we'll see you later. Bye.